Panama trade deal done?
Well, the President has now said that he will not send...
And we do leave this now. You can find it online in its entirety at cspan.org. The Senate is about to gavel in for morning business. And at 4 o'clock, a speech about the negotiations over the debt ceiling, the budget, proposed tax and spending cuts, and the state of the U.S. economy by Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He'll take the floor at 4 Eastern.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. High and holy God, we extol and adore your name. Lord, you shower us with love and forgiveness, and you guide our footsteps through life's challenging seasons. Today we pray that you would bless America, quicken the hearts of its citizens, that they may labor to bring honor to you. Redeem this land from coarse secular prosperity and build it up in an ethical and moral fitness that will bless the world. Use our senators today as your choice instruments. May they not lose the vision of the goals of righteousness and honor, of justice and understanding, of peace and goodwill. We pray in your matchless name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 27, 2011. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business. Senators will be allowed to speak for 10 minutes each. Senator Sanders will be recognized in morning business at 4 p.m. for up to 90 minutes. There will be no roll call votes today. The first vote of this week will be tomorrow at noon on confirmation of James Cole to be Deputy Attorney General. Also on Tuesday, the Senate will resume consideration of the Presidential Appointment Efficiency and Streamlining Act. We need to work out agreement to complete that action on the bill as soon as we can. Additionally, we hope to confirm David Petraeus to be Director of the CIA this week. Mr. President, we have an idea of what we need to get done this week, but it's up to members as to when we get it done. It's not magic that we finish here Thursday night. We should be able to finish Thursday, get all the work we need done, but if we don't, we're going to have this spill over until Friday. We've got the finish the Presidential Appointment Efficiency Act. We need to do that. We've got a number of nominations we've already agreed to we have to vote on, and we have to do David Petraeus. So there's no reason we can't get all that done, but we'll need some cooperation from senators to get it done. Mr. President, last Thursday, Democrats sat down with the chief executives of 3 successful corporations. Their companies are responsible for the jobs and livelihoods of about 100,000 American workers. One company makes medications that help Americans to live longer, healthier lives. Another invests in entrepreneurship, giving inventors the capital they need to bring their ideas to the production line. Another employs scientists and engineers to make more efficient the things we use every day, from jet engines to home thermostats. These 3 COs understand what it takes to create jobs. So we asked them what Washington can do to help. This is what they told us. All Democratic senators were there. First, we must improve and reform our education system, from kindergarten through the 12th grade, so we produce the skilled workers of tomorrow. Plus, we need to train more scientists, engineers, and mathematicians so we don't risk falling behind China, India, and other global competitors. All 3 of these executives, all of them, believe we must reform our immigration system to stay competitive. The brightest students from around the globe come to the United States to take advantage of our world-class universities. Unfortunately, our broken immigration system forces most of those students to go back to their home countries where they compete with American companies. We should be keeping the best here, where they're educated, so they can build companies that employ U.S. workers. Of course, we must simplify and streamline our broken tax system, lowering rates but eliminating loopholes so everyone pays his or her fair share, including corporations. This is what the 3 successful CEOs told us that we should do to create jobs for American workers. I know these are big issues, Mr. President. They're complicated and they're politically divisive. We can't tackle them all at once, but they're not the only solution. These three CEOs we met with last week said there are smaller, more manageable issues we can tackle right now. There are things we can do to help create jobs right now. Mother Teresa urged us to, quote, be faithful in small things because it's in them that your strength lies, end of quote. Putting Americans back to work can and should start with the small things. So this is what these 3 successful CEOs told us we should do to spur hiring. First, we authorize a program that gives grants to the technology companies that are inventing new products, like the electric toothbrush or body armor for soldiers, so these innovators can continue to grow and hire. That's what we tried to do with the Small Business Innovation Research legislation. The Republicans stopped it. Second, they said we should modernize Americans' air travel system, making it safer and more efficient to fly American skies. That's what we tried to do when we reauthorized the Federal Aviation Administration, which is lost in the Republican-dominated House. Third, we must reform our patent system and clear a 3-year backlog of applications. The next laptop, computer, or iPod could be in that pile, just waiting to be taken from the basement to the boardroom. That's what we tried to do with the American Defense Act. The House passed a version of our bill, but the person, for example, Senator Coburn, has said that he's going to stop this bill because it doesn't have the payment system that was a good idea. We all thought here, we voted this 95 to 5. But again, it's been stopped by the Republicans. That is our patent system. Mr. President, these 3 things I just talked about, that's more than it's 580,000 jobs just for patents and FAA. And there's tens of thousands of jobs with small business innovation. These are common sense steps we can take today. Each will help put people to work across the country. That's just not what the Senate says. It's what business leaders say. But here's the catch. Congress has already taken up, as I've indicated, all 3 of these measures. Not one has become law. Why? Republicans have killed or stalled all 3 of these important pieces of legislation. Legislation business owners say they need to put more than 500,000 Americans back to work. Putting Americans back to work must be our most important debt reduction strategy. Democrats know it is critical that we reduce the deficit and pay down the national debt, but we will never balance the budget with 14 million people out of work. Democrats know how to balance budgets. Remember when Democrats in Congress helped President Clinton balance the budget in 1998, unemployment was 4.5%. Now, unfortunately, it's twice that. That's why we must do 2 things at once: reduce the deficit and do whatever it takes to get the American worker back doing the things they need to do to bring in a paycheck. The business leaders we spoke with support this 2-pronged approach. Democrats and Republicans don't have to look hard to find common ground. We only have to be willing to admit when we see it. I met with the President earlier today. We had a productive meeting. My Republican counterpart will meet with the President this afternoon. I hope my Republican colleagues will put the economy ahead of politics. I hope they'll join us to create jobs and set aside their desire to please the Tea Party and defeat President Obama. This is the way forward. Neither party should confront this crisis alone, and no one will be successful unless we confront it together. We owe the country our commitment to do at least the small things. And again, I repeat Mother Teresa when she said that it is in them, that is the small things, that our strength lies. And they, in turn, will inspire faith that the big things will follow.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
a little later today I'll sit down with President Obama to discuss his request to raise the nation's debt ceiling. And when I do, I intend to make a request of my own. I intend to ask the President what he is prepared to do, outside of raising taxes, about the massive deficits and debt that have accumulated on his watch. I will tell him what Republicans are looking for in this debate: to cut spending now, cap runaway spending in the future, and save our entitlements from bankruptcy, and to get our economy moving. And I will tell him the truth about requests by some in his party that we increase spending and raise taxes as a way of solving the debt and jobs crisis that precipitated the President's request to raise the debt limit in the first place. Not only are they counterproductive from the standpoint of an economic recovery, they're also politically impossible, since Republicans oppose tax hikes and Democrats have already shown they won't raise taxes in a down economy either. So let's start by taking both proposals off the table and focus on what can actually pass Congress and what will actually spur the private sector in our future and create jobs. Now, those who are calling for tax hikes as a part of these debt discussions either have amnesia about the fate of similar proposals just 6 months ago, when Democrats controlled both chambers of Congress by very large margins, as well as the White House, or they're acting in bad faith, since we all know that including massive job-killing tax hikes would be a poison pill. Let's move past the tax hikes and talk about what's actually possible, and let's talk about what has and hasn't worked over the last 2 years. On this second point, this much is clear. If government spending were the answer to an economic slowdown, we'd be in a boom time right now. If government spending were the answer to an economic slowdown, we'd be in a boom time right now. Instead, we're facing record deficits and debt, and a seemingly endless stream of bad economic news. Despite massive spending increases by Democrats, millions have lost their jobs. So the problem here is that Washington spends too much. And that means Democrats are simply going to have to make that kind of tough choice about Washington's budget that most other Americans have been forced to make about their own budgets over the past couple of years. Last week, President Obama told a group of people he was prepared to bring down the deficit by trillions of dollars, but refused to list any of the ways he was willing to do it. All he did was list the things he refused to cut. And this weekend, the President proposed even more deficit-financed spending, disguised as what he called investment. You really can't have it both ways. At some point, the President needs to realize that the reason our debt has skyrocketed 35% over the last 2 years, and that our annual deficit is now 3 times greater than the highest deficit in the previous administration that they ever ran, is that spending has spiraled completely and totally out of control, and that the big government policies of the past 2 years have simply got to change. Just consider the failed stimulus bill. When Democrats passed it, they said it was a one-time cash infusion that was supposed to keep unemployment below 8%. 2 years later, with unemployment still hovering around 9%, They're saying we need to keep up the stimulus-level spending despite its obvious failure. Their commitment to spending and tax hikes is so deeply held, it seems, they don't even recognize the state of our economy or the fact that the tax and spend policies of the past 2 years have made matters worse, and that they have to change if they're ever going to get out of the fiscal mess that we're in. Democrats seem to think the solution to our debt crisis is to ask taxpayers and struggling businesses to reward their economic stewardship with even more money to spend as they please. They don't seem to understand that the voters didn't elect dozens of additional Republicans to the House of Representatives last November because they wanted their taxes raised. They sent them here to reverse policies that had failed. Now, we've seen the consequences of giving Washington a blank check. It's the reason we're in the mess to begin with. So my message to the President is really quite simple. It's time for Washington to focus on fixing itself. It's time for Washington to take the hit, not the taxpayers. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 6 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
I suggest the items.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
You're watching live coverage here of the Senate floor on C-SPAN 2. We're expecting at 4 o'clock a speech about the negotiations over the debt ceiling, the budget, and the proposed tax and spending cuts and the state of the U.S. economy. That's going to come from Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and he'll take the floor at 4 o'clock Eastern. And tomorrow morning in the Senate, starting at 10 Eastern, the Senate will proceed to executive session. They're going to be considering nominations for deputy and assistant attorneys general, and there will be 2 hours of debate divided equally between the two leaders, with a vote on the nominations scheduled for noon tomorrow. And you can watch that live right here on C-SPAN 2. Also, a quick news update during this break. On the Supreme Court's last scheduled day for this session, the court has ruled in a case involving the sale of violent video games to minors, saying that the state of California cannot ban the rental or sale of those games. And you can check out more details of that decision on our website, cspan.org. And you can also find there a link to remarks from the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who spoke at a conference this past weekend.
Ms. Ayotte.
Mr. President,
The senator from Wyoming.
I ask unanimous consent to rescind the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, nearly every day we see scenes playing out in countries around the world whose financial security are in ruins. This is the last thing that we want to experience in our great country, and that is why we need to reform our fiscal policy and the way that we've done business. There's too much at stake not to take action. The International Monetary Fund urged us to address our soaring budget deficits, and credit ratings agencies, Moody's and S&P, may be forced to downgrade our investments of the AAA rating. So what is the majority doing to address this fiscal crisis? Absolutely nothing. It's been nearly 790 days without the majority in this chamber proposing a budget, and it appears that the majority isn't anxious to work on one. The majority-led Budget Committee has failed to meet this year to begin working on a resolution. We can't even have an open debate in this chamber about the budget. Instead of voting to start the debate on budget measures last month, the majority squashed all the proposals, including the President's own plan. This failure to govern at the most basic level, and the American people deserve better. We need a budget that puts us on the path to fiscal discipline. Every week we hear warnings of why this must be done. Last week the Congressional Budget Office issued the starkest warning yet of the danger posed by our spending problems. Our nation's debt will exceed the size of the U.S. economy by 2021 and will double the size of our nation's GDP within 25 years. This is not the way I want to leave this country for my kids, my grandkids, and the people of Arkansas. In his State of the Union address, President Obama pushed for a conversation that will put us on the path to fiscal responsibility. But so far, he has been absent from the discussions. Only today, 36 days before the deadline given by Secretary Geithner to raise the legal limit on federal borrowing, is he beginning to take leadership in negotiating for spending limitations. Our debt is slowing the economic recovery. The simple truth is higher debt leads to slower economic growth. We've seen this with the failed stimulus, but in the past week, the Senate-led majority is once again proposing this flawed strategy. This failed policy of borrowing, spending, and taxing is just what the CBO is warning us to avoid. It hasn't worked in the past, and it won't work in the future. What we need are debt reduction measures in the form of spending cuts. The CBO's last report shows that spending is the primary cause of our fiscal crisis and supports spending cuts rather than tax increases to reverse this trend. I urge President Obama to take tax hikes off the table. Let's get to work reining in the reckless spending and putting our nation back on a fiscally responsible path. If American families ran their household budgets like Washington runs its budget, the utilities would be shut off and the collection agencies would be knocking on their doors. American people are now knocking on the doors of the Capitol, demanding that the government limit its spending. We must rein in our spending to protect programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security for current recipients and for future generations. In order to achieve this, we must reform the manner in which we budget and allocate federal dollars. We need a mechanism to cap spending and force the government to spend within its means. We must act now to move our country off the brink of financial collapse, and we must make tough decisions because that is what the American people deserve and expect of us. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
And while the Senate's in a quorum call, let you know about some of tonight's programs on the C-SPAN networks. On the communicators, 2 TV executives discuss developments in the television industry. You'll hear from Doug Herzog, the president of MTV, and Kevin Leddy, the president of Tech Policy and Product Management for Time Warner Cable. And we'll have their discussion tonight at 8 Eastern here on C-SPAN 2. Also tonight at 8 on our companion network C-SPAN, Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann's announcement from earlier today that she's running for the Republican nomination for president. And the Senate, again in a quorum call, but later, 4 Eastern, we'll hear from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He'll take the floor to talk about the negotiations over the debt ceiling and the budget and the proposed tax and spending cuts. And tomorrow morning in the Senate, starting at 10 Eastern, an executive session to consider nominations for Deputy and Assistant Attorneys General. There'll be 2 hours of debate on those nominees with a vote scheduled for noon. And again, that's tomorrow. You can watch live coverage of the U.S. Senate right here on C-SPAN 2.
Without objection.
And that I may speak for up to a half an hour as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, 3 events conjoined to, I think, elevate the subject of the U.S. debt crisis in this country and should really energize us in the Senate and our colleagues in the House to redouble our efforts to find a solution to this serious problem. I'd like to briefly mention those 3 events and then talk about the problem from my perspective, some of the potential solutions, and put an item in the congressional record for my colleagues' review. The first of the things that occurred was a new report by the Congressional Budget Office, which was a new projection about U.S. debt as a percentage of our economy. And one of the things they said was that our debt could almost double by the year 2035, far larger than they thought it would be as a percent of our economy, or the GDP. And they said it's going to exceed 100% by the year 2021. Actually, it could get to that point even sooner than that. It's approaching 100% right now. Greece is just a little bit over 100%. Countries that get to that 100% level of public debt as a percent of the GDP have a very hard time ever recovering. And as a result, the time is now for the United States government to act on our huge and growing debt. Secondly, we had reports by the Labor Department, the Commerce Department, and others that just confirm what we already know about the state of our economy and the state of joblessness in this country. Applications for unemployment benefits rose. It was the biggest jump in a month. You know, we're over 9% unemployment now. New home sales fell in May. The values of our homes in this country have decreased more than they did during the Great Depression. And that's really been a horrible factor for millions of American families. Stocks fell last week. The Federal Reserve Board, lowered its outlook for growth, which in the last quarter was less than 2%. It was 1.9%. And this is unacceptable. It's much lower than ordinarily recovery is coming out of a recession. Confidence slipping among small business and households, higher gas prices, higher food prices. All of this simply confirms what most of us have heard from our constituencies, namely this recovery is not much of a recovery, and we need to do everything we can to try to improve it. And third, of course, the news that negotiations with the White House over extending the debt ceiling had broken down. Actually, as a member of the group negotiating that, I wouldn't say they've broken down. I think the Vice President is correct that they've moved on to a new phase, namely the phase where the President himself, Speaker of the House, the 2 leaders here in the Senate, are going to have to try to resolve some of the largest issues, the kinds of issues that the negotiators in the so-called Biden talks were simply not able to resolve because it would go against instructions from our principals. The primary problem there was the insistence by the Democratic negotiators that Republicans agree to tax hikes, something which we think would be inimical to economic growth. The very problem of the slow recovery in the economy would be exacerbated by if we were to increase our tax rates. You don't add new taxes to an already struggling economy. And so the White House's insistence that that had to be a condition to approving the reductions in spending that we had been talking about made it impossible for us to go forward at that time. Well, there's an old saying that there's a difference between a pessimist and an optimist. I usually think of myself as optimistic. The saying is, the pessimist says things are so bad they can't get any worse. And the optimist says, sure they can. And they could. If the Congressional Budget Office is correct about its projections here, we could be in a far worse debt situation tomorrow or the year after that than we are today, a situation which would make it extremely difficult for us to ever recover and essentially relegate our children and our grandchildren to a standard of living far below that which we've all been accustomed to and which they deserve. So just looking at some of the other factors that should frame the problem for us, we've got over a $14 trillion debt and growing every day. We're going to need $2.4 trillion in increased debt ceiling authority just to get us through the end of next year. And you can't tax your way out of it. You can't borrow your way out of it. We've got to reduce the level of spending, which is now approaching 25% of our gross domestic product. The average is around 20%, and that's where we were before President Obama took office. We have to borrow now 40 cents of every dollar we spend. So when we talk about spending more money in a new stimulus package, another new idea to come out of the Democratic Congress last week, we're talking about having to borrow 40 cents of all of that money that would be spent. Just think of it now. Every program that we have here at the federal government level, we have to borrow more than 40 cents of the money that we're then going to spend. And that takes money out of the private sector that is needed to produce jobs and provide for investment in the public sector, in the private sector. I mentioned before, unemployment is over 9% now, and according to the CBO projection, is not going to go down by very much over the course of the next year, if at all. So what's the solution? Well, a lot of our Democratic friends have said that we need to have a new stimulus program. We need to spend even more, notwithstanding that we don't have the money, and that we should be raising taxes. And as I mentioned, that's the reason why we terminated the discussion with Vice President Biden last week, because of the insistence on the part of our Democratic colleagues that the only way they were willing to move forward was if we committed to raising taxes, and I mean by a substantial amount. There was $400 billion in revenue raisers on the table put there by our Democratic colleagues. That simply won't pass the House of Representatives, but more importantly, it would be the worst medicine possible for an ailing economy. We can't afford more spending, and even if we could, it wouldn't put Americans back to work. Jobs are created by private businesses, and the more the government taxes or borrows, the less there is available for businesses to invest and hire. So the answer here is less government spending, not more taxation and more borrowing. Now, we put forth a budget. The Republicans passed it in the House of Representatives. We voted on it here in the Senate. And it didn't pass because Democrats in the Senate would not support it. But it's a legitimate effort to allow job creation, economic recovery, and eventually get our budget balanced at the federal government level here, back here in Washington. People have said it's a radical budget. It's not. Even under the so-called Ryan budget, we would go another $5 trillion in debt. Now, you can't call that radically slashing spending if over the next 10 years we add another $5 trillion to our national debt. That just shows you how hard it is to reduce spending. People say, well, you can't cut this program, you can't cut that program, and you cut them in a way that still adds $5 trillion in debt over 10 years, and they say it's radical, you're slashing spending. Well, the Obama budget, by contrast, would add $12 trillion in debt. So both of them would add to our debt, but at least under the Ryan budget that was passed by the House of Representatives, over time we would get back into balance. In fact, it would be in primary balance by the year 2014, meaning except for interest payments, it would be a balanced budget. And we would reduce federal spending from 25% of our economy back down to a little over 20%, which is the historic average. Excuse me, it'd be a little under 20%, which would be close to our historic average of spending as a percent of the gross domestic product. One of the best ways for us to ensure that we are in balance is to adopt a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. All 47 Senate Republicans have co-sponsored the balanced budget amendment. And it's carefully written so that even though it requires balance in the budget, it does not easily allow Congress to raise taxes as a way of achieving balance. That would require a two-thirds vote. And it also contains a very important spending limitation as a percent of the gross domestic product. So we would achieve balance, but we would achieve balance by reducing our appetite for Washington spending here, and as a result could achieve the kind of balance that would promote economic growth. You could spend more money if we had more economic growth, because spending would be tied to the gross domestic product. So it's a perfect solution for Republicans and Democrats alike. If you like to spend more money, there's a perfectly good way to get to spend more money. Do things that would enhance the recovery of our economy. Because the bigger our economy got, the higher the percentage of money that Washington could spend. The incentives are aligned properly. We propose to promote economic growth, and so this balanced budget amendment would accomplish that. And for those who like to spend money, the more growth, the more money you get to spend. We hope that that balanced budget amendment will come to the Senate floor in the next week or two or three. We certainly look forward to the opportunity to debate it and getting a vote on it. But when you look at the alternative that has been proposed by a lot of our colleagues on the other side, a new stimulus program and increased taxes, you just have to wonder, how serious are they about actually helping our economy recover? Everything so far that the other side has tried under the leadership of the President has failed to work. In fact, it's actually made things worse. I mean, we're all familiar with the stimulus that didn't help. It didn't bring unemployment down like the President promised. It made things worse. That's why I have this chart here that shows that the Obama economic record has not made things better. It's made things worse. Just look at a few of the things that are afflicting our economy today, the indicia of what's wrong. And you start with the inauguration day for President Obama, where we are today and what the change has been. If you look at unemployment, unemployment has gone up by 1.9 million Americans. The unemployment rate has gone up 17% since the President took office. So this is not like a situation where he said, well, I inherited a bad economy, but I'm gradually making it better. He's making it worse. Gas prices have gone up 101% under President Obama. He won't approve the leases that would allow our oil companies to explore for more oil and gas, thus bringing the prices down. The federal debt has gone up 35% just since the President took office. The debt per person has increased by $11,311. It's gone up from $34,000 to over $46,000. That's the debt that each one of us have. So it's increased that much in just 1 year. By the way, health insurance premiums have gone up in the so-called Obamacare. Getting back to this matter of debt, just to put it in perspective, if you took all of the presidents of the United States from George Washington all the way through the presidency of George W. Bush, you took all of those presidents and added up all of the debt from the Civil War, the debt from World War I, from World War II, from Vietnam, all of the debt that all of the presidents of the United States accumulated in one budget, President Obama will double that debt. Each one of the years that he's been president, we've had a deficit of over $1 trillion, closer to $1.5 trillion. So at the end of 5 years, he will have doubled the debt. At the end of 10 years, he will have tripled the debt that all of the other presidents of the United States combined accumulate. Now I say the presidents. Obviously, it takes a Congress to do this as well. And what the members of the House of Representatives are saying to the Obama budget is no. And even the President decided not to pursue his budget. When that was offered on the Senate floor, not a single member of the United States Senate, Democrat or Republican, voted for the Obama budget because it takes us in the wrong direction. It would make things even worse than they are today. At least with the Republican budget, you have an effort to begin to solve the problem, even though a lot of people say that it was not enough in the way of cuts, and they have proposed alternatives to reduce spending even more. I'm all for reducing spending even more. The bottom line is, however, we've got to get something passed that's going to take Democrats and Republicans working together. And so I'm happy to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but we have got to have some cooperation to reduce spending and not insist on tax increases. What we have said as a part of these negotiations to increase the budget deficit is some of us might be willing to increase the debt ceiling if we don't have to keep doing it. We need reforms that will enable us to not have to keep raising the debt ceiling, or at least not so much. And the way you achieve those reforms is, first of all, to identify savings that can be made. And there's an enormous amount of wasteful Washington spending. We've identified, I think it's closer to $500 billion. The Vice President has said more than $1 trillion. The money is certainly out there to be saved. We need to save that kind of money on the front end as a down payment to let the markets know and to let the American people know that we're serious. And that's savings that we could pass, that could be locked in. And by the way, there's a little bit of revenues involved in that. It's not just all savings. There are some fee increases. There are user fees. There are some means testing of various federal programs that can actually result in some increase in revenue. So when our Democratic friends say, well, there has to be revenue on the table, there is revenue on the table, but it's not tax increases. So if you're so ideological that you've got to insist on tax increases in order to cut spending, unfortunately, you've taken yourself out of the game. Bottom line is there's somewhere between at least $500 billion and $1 trillion, probably more, in various kinds of mandatory savings that we could achieve. And then we have discretionary spending. We need to set a budget number since the Senate has not passed a budget in over 700 days now. I think I forgot the exact number, but we haven't had a budget, so we don't have a number that the Appropriations Committee can deal with to appropriate funds for the discretionary part of our spending in this country. We need to set that number. The Ryan budget set that number, and we were negotiating with the White House as to what that number would be. But we need to set that number, and then we need to make sure that in the ensuing years, Congress will actually live with that number. The tendency around here has been to set a budget number, and then we have an emergency here, and we need to waive it there, and the next thing you know, we're way over the number that we all agreed to in the beginning. So we need something that will constrain both discretionary and mandatory spending over the course of the next 10 years and hopefully beyond. Now, a lot of us believe that the best constraint is the balanced budget amendment. But for colleagues who say, no, we're never going to agree to that, and of course we'd have to get 20 colleagues here in the Senate to agree in order to pass it. It takes a two-thirds majority. Then at least agree with us to put handcuffs on the Congress and the President, some kind of straitjacket so that we don't spend beyond the number that we agree on for next year and the year after that. We could save well over $1 trillion, somewhere between $1 trillion and even more than $1.5 trillion in discretionary spending over the next 10 years if we would agree to these so-called Section 302A top-line budget numbers and then constrain ourselves to sticking with those numbers over time. The reason, it's kind of like compound interest. If you set a level that, let's say we reduce spending in next year's budget by $30 billion over the previous year. That's not a huge amount of money. But that, over a course of 10 years, when you set a new baseline, translates into hundreds of billions of dollars, if we really do it. Now, the Bipartisan Congressional Budget Office says we're not sure we want to score that as real savings because we're not sure you'll really do it. But if we're able to pass some kind of constraint, like the old Gramm-Rudman bill, for example, then the Congressional Budget Office, I think, will give us some credit for those constraints. The best proposal I've seen is one proposed by Senator Corker and Senator McCaskill. It's bipartisan, a Republican and a Democrat, and they have Republican and Democrat co-sponsors for the same proposal in the House of Representatives. It's called the CAP Act, to cap spending. So once the level is determined, they do it as a percent of the GDP. I think that's the smartest way because that's an incentive for everybody to help the economy grow more, because the more it grows, then the more, as a percentage, the spending can be. And over 10 years, you save a lot of money that way. It's enforced by the simple mechanism that if you don't achieve the savings that are called for, then there's an automatic sequester where all of the accounts of the government, defense spending, non-defense spending, mandatory spending, would all have to save a little bit. They wouldn't be able to spend quite as much money so that you could make up the difference between the target or the goal and what the law called for. There are other ways to do it as well. We were discussing different alternatives in the conversations with Senator Biden, Vice President Biden. But the point here is that you can't allow waivers, you can't have exemptions and emergencies and all of that, at least not without a supermajority vote, like a 3/4 vote or a 2/3 vote, or else it's going to be too easy for Congress to do what it's done in the past, which is to simply say, this is too uncomfortable for us to comply with. We're going to declare this an emergency. vote for it by a majority vote, and then it's done. If we mean it, we have to be willing to abide by it. So you have to have a meaningful down payment. We can do that. We've already identified substantial savings. You need to have a 302A budget number for at least the next couple of years and a mechanism for enforcing that over the next decade and beyond. And finally, we need to have a way to help the markets actually believe that we are serious about entitlement reform so that the biggest part of our budget, representing 2/3 of all the money we spend, namely the entitlements, are actually beginning to grow at a slower pace. We're not talking about drastic cuts, but we are talking about slowing the pace of growth. And you can do that without having huge benefit cuts or without slashing payments to the providers. I mean, the last thing you want to do for Medicare, for example, I'm concerned my mother, we could use any of our mothers or dads or grandparents are on Medicare. The last thing you want to do is say, you've got a great Medicare program except for one thing. There's no doctor or hospital to take care of you, because they won't, because we're not paying them enough. So you need to be able to pay the people who rely upon for the medical treatment that we have promised. And we can't do that by slashing payments to providers. Too many physicians have already said we can't afford this program anymore, and therefore we're not going to take any more new Medicare patients. We've all had that experience. Nor should you do it by slashing benefits. But you don't have to do either of those two things to have reforms. I mentioned in these negotiations, we've been discussing a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse type reforms. Now, those of us in the Senate and the House will kind of smile because we always talk about the amount of money that can be saved because of the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. But the reality is there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. And you can save a lot of money if you put your mind to it. But what that means is, for example, you have to enforce the law. I'll pick a hypothetical program, because we're not going to be talking about the specifics with our negotiations. I'm assuming we'll get back to those negotiations at some point. But you have eligibility standards to receive a certain federal benefit, let's say. But 20% of the benefits that are being paid out erroneously to people who don't qualify. They're not supposed to get the benefit. And so you enforce the law. You say, sorry, you don't qualify for this benefit. This is a benefit for the elderly, or this is a benefit for poorer Americans, or for whatever. And if you just enforce the law, you can save a lot of money. And that's not cutting benefits for anyone. You can also do means testing. Republicans for years have said, and I think I won't, well, I'll use a couple of names because I think they both said we don't need the benefits of all these Medicare programs. People like Warren Buffett, for example, have made it clear, and Bill Gates have both made it clear. They don't need to have the government take care of their medical requirements when they're age 65 or older. And there are a lot of Americans that are in the position to be able to afford a lot more of their own care, and they don't have to rely exclusively on the federal government. So through means testing, you can either provide that their benefits will not be as generous as for people who are less fortunate economically, or that they'll pay a little bit more in the way of a copay or a deductible or maybe even a premium. Bottom line is there are ways to ensure the future success of a program like Medicare without affecting people who cannot afford to have big benefit cuts. One idea that hasn't been discussed, but I've heard it discussed, is to simply conform Medicare benefits to the same age eligibility as Social Security. That would save a great deal of money. It would represent a slowing in the time when you are eligible for the benefit. Maybe some people believe, therefore, that it shouldn't be considered. My point here is that there are a lot of ways that the entitlement programs can be reformed so that they will be there when you need them. If we don't, if we say we don't want to touch them, here's what's going to happen. I'll give you one program as an example. Medicare Part A, that's the hospital part. The Medicare trustees say that by the year 2021, Medicare Part A begins to run out of money. There won't be as much money in the trust fund. And it could well, therefore, happen that in the following years, if you want to go to the hospital isn't there anymore. If you live in a small town, It's the only hospital there, and they can't afford to stay open. They're going to close. So you think you have Medicare Part A benefits, but the hospital either isn't there or it can't take care of you because it doesn't have the money to do so because it's not being reimbursed by the federal government. So the choice is not to do something or to do nothing. If you do nothing, the benefits won't be there. The benefits we promised to senior citizens won't be there. Doing nothing is not an option. We have to do something. So instead of demagoguing the issue politically, some politicians need to be responsible, get in the game, and say, let's figure out a way to save these programs so that they'll be there when we want them. I also wanted to mention, this is a little bit off point, but it just shows you how some of these things work. I mentioned high gas prices before. Ironically, one of the things that the President has said we want to do is to tax the oil companies. Well, of course, if you tax the oil companies more, then gas prices are going to be higher. The President just released some of the petroleum from the National Petroleum Reserve to try to bring gas prices down. And it'll bring them down a little bit temporarily. But why would you then want to have those prices go right back up again by taxing the oil companies, which everyone knows will flow through to the consumer? It doesn't make sense. There's something else, however, that does make sense, and this has had an impact on gas prices. The Federal Reserve Board has been buying bonds under a program called QE2, buying Treasury bonds, and the purchase of those Treasury bonds has made our dollar less valuable. That means that it takes more dollars to buy the same amount of gasoline. So ironically, this effort by the Fed to put more money into the economy has had the pernicious effect of raising gas prices, raising food prices, raising other prices, because the dollar isn't as valuable as it used to be, and to buy the same commodity, especially commodities that are bought and sold on the world market, like gas, you have to have more dollars to pay for the same amount. So gas prices are increased. Well, this program, this QE2 program, is going to come to an end at the end of this month. The Federal Reserve has already announced that. And what will happen as a result is that the value of the dollar will not be cut by the amount of this purchase of bonds, or selling of bonds rather, and so the expiration of the program lets the dollar strengthen, causing oil to return to levels that we last saw at around the beginning of this year. That will have the result of you'll have more purchasing power with the dollar you have, so you can buy the same amount of gasoline for fewer dollars. Or, to put another way, the same amount of dollars that you have will buy you more gasoline. And that is one positive effect as a result of that change in policy by the United States government. But the key here is to allow our economy to work without too much government interference. That's a good example of government interference that displaces or that reduces the value of the dollar and therefore hurts the consumer. I heard something my colleague, our colleague from Florida, Senator Rubio, said the other day. This is reported on June 14th. And in his first speech here on the Senate floor, he said, and I'm quoting now, "There's nothing wrong with our people. Americans haven't forgotten how to start a business. They haven't run out of good ideas. Americans are as great as we've ever been, but our government is broken. And a broken government is keeping us from doing what we've done better than anyone in the world for over a century, namely, create jobs." He's right. If the government will get out of the way, will not insist on burdening our economy with new taxes, and will just let Americans do what they've always been willing to do, able to do well, I think we'll be able to come out of this economic downturn and come back to life as an economy, helping our families, small businesses, and ironically, by making more money and paying taxes at the same tax rate, the federal government will have the benefit of our increase in salaries and profits and so on, and will actually have more money to spend as well. Spending more money, taxing more, having the government try to stimulate the economy has never worked. And I'd like to put into the record a statement from the a quotation from the Wall Street Journal of today, June 27th, which is as follows. With spending at 24% and debt held by the public at 70% of GDP, both modern records, the U.S. needs drastic spending cuts to head off a downward future spiral of tax increases and unaffordable interest payments. As Milton Friedman taught, spending is the real measure of government's burden on the private economy, and reducing it leaves more resources for private actors to spend and invest, end quote. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you.